Tēnā koutou. No North Shore aho, ko aho te tumu whakaari o Scion. Ko Julian Elder aho. As I said in my opening, I'm Julian Elder, Chief Executive of Scion, and I'm here today to talk to you through a little bit of our strategy journey that we've been having at Scion for about the last 3 years, and really a strategy to support the future of forestry and what we see as the very large opportunity. You're all aware that the New Zealand forestry industry is the third largest export earner, worth over $6 billion a year and employs more than 35,000 people. Some of you will probably tell me that during COVID we might have been the second largest export earner, but certainly very significant for New Zealand. And I think one of the things that always excited me when I was asked about coming to Scion was the opportunities in front of the sector and the benefits that could be delivered for New Zealand. It always stood out in my mind the opportunity to double the growth rate of our plantation forests, mean annual increment, by 2050. That's a huge change that could be delivered. And there's a very significant opportunity to add value to the fibre we grow and the residuals that we don't use. In looking at that picture, there was a real question around, well, what's Scion's role in this? So we go back to our statement of core purpose, and this is mandated by Cabinet. It states that Scion's core purpose is to drive innovation and growth from New Zealand's forestry, wood product and wood-derived materials and other biomaterial sectors to create economic value and contribute to beneficial environmental and social outcomes for New Zealand. We've examined this purpose, I guess, and debated it a number of times, but really concluded that in relation to what we're doing, it is very appropriate and apt to the future opportunities and challenges we see in front of the country. But it resulted in quite a challenge that I'll cover next. And the challenge comes about because of our belief that there is a huge opportunity in light of the changes and challenges the world is facing. There had been little engagement with government and ministers on how to progress these challenges and opportunities. When I started, it was common with particularly senior ministers to talk about all sorts of other export revenue earners in the country, but never mention forestry. That has changed, but we now want to make sure that it's changing in the best direction for the country. Our challenge at Scion is that our revenue is within commercial contracts which have already defined deliverables, mostly decided by the contract holder as against enabling us to deliver on our purpose. So on one hand we see this huge opportunity, and on the other hand we spend a lot of our time winning whatever bids we can win and doing what's contained within those bids. Research and development is essential to delivering on the opportunities. However, it cannot be delivered through R&D alone and needs mission-led programs with partners, particularly in forestry. As you all know, forestry is a long game. So we decided we needed to develop a compelling narrative and get all stakeholders engaged to deliver what we see as a very bright future if we do this. So the compelling narrative started by looking out to 2050 and saying, well, what could we enable through the power of forestry? And the things that we've stipulated here is, I guess, aspirational, so a 10-fold increase in GDP from forests and manufacturing, zero carbon emissions, erodible land planted in permanent forests, water quality issues from land use mitigated, sustainable communities and economies, high OECD household net wealth ranking, a top 5 ranking in OECD Better Life Index. So these are really quite aspirational outcomes and impacts that we identified that forestry could play a central role in enabling for New Zealand by 2050. And the aim is to paint this compelling picture for people to go, yes, that is a future that we would like to work towards. and then move on to working out, well, what role would forestry play in that if it was enabled to do so. So we looked at this and decided that for our sector there was three primary focus areas that we would look at in terms of making impact. So we defined those three research impact areas through to 2030 as being forests and landscapes, and these are forests that are primarily planted for their standing forest purposes. Forest through to high value timber products, timber manufacturing and products, and forest through to bio-based manufacturing and products. The first one, forests and landscapes, we've split into three portfolios: establishing indigenous forests, restoration, protection and Maori of Te Wānui Atane, and designing forests mahi tahi whaihua. And as I said, this is primarily focused on permanent standing benefits from forests, these three portfolios. The types of impacts that we envisage these portfolios contributing to by 2030 was an 8 million tonne increase in sequestered carbon in new forests, converting 30% of underused Maori land to standing forests, 100% increase in value of Maori standing forests, 80% increase in forested area to enhance soil and water resources, biodiversity, landscape resilience and the locking of soil, and 100% increase in the use for forests for human health and well-being. The aim of these impact measures is to set, again, some aspirational goals and a direction of travel so that we can then evaluate what will need to happen for those sorts of outcomes to be achieved. Now, over time, those outcomes will modify as our context changes, but the direction of travel is the one that we're trying to determine now, and who will need to be engaged with that, and what are the challenges in getting there that we will need to overcome, and who will need to be involved to do that. So very much, again, not focused on, at this point, on what does our research will be doing, but what are all of the aspects that will need to be taken on board if we're going to get there. The next impact focus area is forest to timber products, and in its portfolios are trees for high volume wood products. So that's sort of the commodity end of what we do in plantation forestry. Trees for high value wood products. And I guess one of the areas there that we have been focused on, but we'll be focused on other species as well, is some of the strengths of Pinus radiata in terms of its ability to be modified as a key strength of that species. Indigenous trees for distinct value wood products, and the new value digital forests and wood sector. It's interesting to note the range of stakeholders that are becoming more and more interested in data and digitisation of the sector, and what we can do with that. So the sorts of impacts from those portfolios that we are looking to help the country deliver on by 2030 is increased GDP by $10 billion through low emission, forest diversity, timber products and sustainable and healthy communities. 1 million tonnes of CO2 reduction from the adoption of circular principles. 2 new living New Zealand communities adopting circular living concepts. Moving on to the third impact area, IA3, forests to bio-based products. And the 4 portfolios are high-value biorefineries, distributed and circular manufacturing. Particularly excited about distributed and circular manufacturing because the global trends around manufacturing are to smaller scale, which suits New Zealand much more than, I guess, the very large-scale petrochemical industries did. And we see these activities moving much closer to the feedstock, so into the forest as an example, but certainly also into our regional communities. So very much about new activities out there in our regions. Bioproducts and packaging, I think we're all aware of the drive away from things like single-use plastics. We want new plastic materials that are sustainable and bio-based and don't have the environmental impacts that we have now. And packaging has always been a significant part of Scion because New Zealand is an export economy, and to export our goods, particularly our primary goods, then packaging is a very significant role to play. And integrated bioenergy, you'll have heard much in recent times about biofuels and sustainable aviation fuels that are being talked about. One of the comments I'll make in that space is we're very persistent about talking to people to think about these things as systems, not as individual desegregated components. The sorts of impacts that we're looking to from these portfolios for New Zealand, 3 new biowharengas established. We'd like to see one of those with indigenous plants as feedstock. $20 billion sustainable GDP growth, 2,500 regional high-value jobs, 300 million litres and $2 billion fuel and plastic substitution, and 10 million tonnes reduction in CO2 equivalents. So again, this is all about trying to paint this picture of opportunity and benefit to New Zealand, and we can see it really revitalising our regions and some vibrant communities and new landscapes and a mosaic of activity across our landscape. So this is a really important conversation for everyone to engage in as to what do we see that looking like and how do we go about doing it. So that was the development, I guess, of our compelling narrative to get people to say, is this the right journey we should be on? And then start to look at, well, what are the key issues, what are the obstacles, what will we need to bring together to actually go on that journey. So where to from here? What we felt we needed to do was develop roadmaps to 2030 for each of these portfolios. So the roadmaps would need to have what are the sort of milestones along the way to measure our progress towards those aspirational impacts that we've outlined. Who will need to be involved? What will need to happen to get there? And really set out some project logic maps around each of the portfolios. We started on this journey by internal workshops, putting some of our ideas down on paper as a straw man, doing some stakeholder mapping, and then starting to engage with stakeholders, and particularly we've had 2 industry and partner workshops, as well as interactions with government. And that has started to develop the roadmaps, and we will be consulting further as we develop up those roadmaps. That will then lead on to our planning of our research programs and the future of Scion. We named these workshops Quadruple Helix workshops because it was important that all stakeholders are engaged in this process that cannot be delivered by one entity alone. So these workshops were made up with representatives from industry, Maori, research and government. And as you can see there, they were called Unleashing the Full Potential of Forest to Deliver a Circular Bioeconomy for Aotearoa. This process that we're following, I guess, is now to really flesh out what are we going to do between now and 2030 and who's going to need to do what. So key issues have been developed out of these workshops and have been captured and repeated again from the first workshop to the second workshop. We're also going to do a follow-up one shortly with our staff, and as we develop out and flesh out those key issues, we will then feed those into the roadmaps and send them out and consult further on them as they shape up to make sure that we are identifying both the opportunities but also what will need to happen to deliver on those. An important part, I guess, of the strategy has been sort of getting the message out. And to get the message out, we've done, I guess, a range of things. We've developed this compelling narrative. We're now consulting widely on that. But one of the light bulb moments, I guess, when I started here was showing people around Scion, and almost every time there was this response, gosh, we had no idea that you guys were doing that, or you know, wow, that's an amazing opportunity. People should know more about it. And even here in Rotorua, we were sort of the secret science establishment behind the fence. And that really came out. We decided to do a pop-up shop in town during the school holidays, and it was a hugely positive response. So that led us to the feeling that we needed to, if you like, take down the fence and open us up to much more to the public and to others. And as part of that, developing this innovation hub, this new building, which is shown here in the picture. And the building, we were very privileged to be gifted the name Te Wharanui o Tuteata by Mana Whenua. And it is a stunning building. Everyone who sees it mentions that. And it you know, weaved into it is a story from Mana Whenua, the story from Scion, the pattern on the roof that you can see there is reflecting the DNA sequence Pinus Radiata, and the lights are in the pattern of Matariki. And of course it's demonstrating what we can actually do with timber in wooden buildings. And also in the building is a public cafe aligned with getting more people in and seeing what we should be doing. And on one side we have the experience centre, so you can come in here and interactively engage with all of the things that Scion have been thinking about in terms of what could deliver on this future, bright future that we've outlined in our compelling narrative. So I do invite you, when you get the chance, to come in and get your kids along to experience that too, because we need to absolutely get that message out. As we've said, I guess the strategy is about this fact that the world is moving away from a linear petrochemical economy to a sustainable circular bioeconomy in response to climate change. So the proposition that we're putting forward here is that the world's response to climate change is actually New Zealand's opportunity. We're seeing increasingly rapid movement, I guess, away from things that people consider are negative to our climate and our environment. I mean, you'll have seen the fairly recent banning of single-use plastic bags, through to government statements now about polystyrene and hard to recycle plastics, hard to recycle single-use plastics. And that, from our perspective, is only accelerating. We're seeing multi-globals really starting now to move beyond statements of carbon zero to statements of restoration of the environment and their future activities. So, in summary, we do see this global climate change challenge as a huge opportunity for New Zealand. We've said potentially $30 billion GDP in 10 years. As we have natural competitive advantages in this future. Namely, we've always been a bioeconomy, relatively little investment sunk in large-scale petrochemical supply chains. We have a great environment for growing food and fibre. We have excellent research and development expertise. New Zealand already has a global sustainable clean green image, and Te Ao Māori is a unique part of the value proposition. So the aim of the roadmaps is to show how to get to the impacts and what will need to happen and who will need to act across all stakeholders, including government, industry, existing and not yet existing industry, iwi and research. We hope this will lead to a system change enabling research to be more mission-led alongside all other necessary actors if impact is going to be fully realised. Just one point, we know that the government's shortly to come out with a Future Pathways consultation package, so I do engage about the future of the science system, so I do ask you to engage in that, make sure we define the problems well, and evolve the system to deliver even more for New Zealand. Thank you.